Maurice Carney, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you again, Nyaka, and the organizers for having me on this morning to share probably more from a grassroots perspective rather than a scholarly perspective. Even though we do have critiques of the whole notion of BRICS and African regional integration. To give the people who are on a sense of who we are, Friends of the Congo is a solidarity institution. And with really two overarching aims. One is to raise global consciousness about what's transpiring in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the second is to provide support to local institutions that are engaged in a Pan-African struggle. Now, we come in the tradition of Friends of Abyssinia, initiated by revolutionaries and Pan-Africanists from the 1930s, when they came to the assistance or to the side in solidarity of the Ethiopians who are under attack by the Italians. The same notion, we maintain that Congo has been under attack for the last quarter century by its neighboring countries backed by an imperial power, and have suffered from a war of aggression, starting in 1996 with the invasion of the Congo by Rwanda and Uganda, and again in 1998. So that's our organizational mandate. When Nyaka asked me to intervene on the question of BRICS and African regional integration, I was trying to figure, well, what does BRICS have to do with African regional integration? I'm not sure that it's the optimum instrument for looking at, I guess you can say, South-South relations and where Africa fits in, both in terms of the individual countries and in terms of regional blocs. The notion of, I share many of the critiques, let's say, that we've seen books written about on BRICS. Probably most noteworthy is the collection put together by Patrick Bond, the BRICS and Anti-Capitalist Critique. Share a lot of the critiques that are found among the authors in that collection of essays. Reason being, if you look at the BRICS, and especially today, and you pull out India, for example, led by Prime Minister Modi, and you pull out Brazil, led by Bolsonaro, and you look at the nature of those states and their relationships with the working class in those countries, and even the most objective observer would have to agree that they represent repressive policies, they represent corporate interests at the expense of the working class. And if, in fact, you're in agreement with that sentiment, you'd have to ask, then what do they have to offer to the global South? What do they have to offer to Africa if their domestic policies are fully ensconced in the capitalist camp? And even with the establishment of BRICS, in their initial declarations, it appeared that they their aim was to get or at least one of the aims anyways, was to get a better seat in the house, so to speak, in the big house, the multilateral institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, as opposed to overturning it or providing an alternative. Although lauded by Fidel Castro coming out of the Brazil summit in 2014 at Fortaleza, that BRICS offered an alternative, one would have to question that, whether or not that whole framework, the notion of BRICS, offer an alternative. And in this brief presentation, I'd like to extract two cases in order to demonstrate why you would have to question whether or not BRICS is offering any kind of fundamental alternative to the existing capitalist order. And I would like to use Congo as a model and the engagement of two BRICS members in the Democratic Republic of Congo, China and South Africa. Now, we've seen China maybe at the time, from 2006 to 2010, probably the biggest investment on the African continent was infrastructure for mineral swap that it proposed, a $10 billion deal. And at the time, Congo was just coming out of the conflict led by Joseph Kabila, and they were highly indebted. In fact, they were a hippie country, highly indebted country. And they were indebted, of course, to the World Bank, the IMF, the Paris Club, the London Club. So all of those institutions, those multilateral institutions, challenge the deal that China had put on the table with the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because they claim that Congo was already indebted and it would be taking on more debt. And in fact, what unfolded as a result of the challenge was a row between China and the West, and especially as it relates to the multilateral institutions. In the Financial Times, China had accused the West of the Western countries and the lending arms of blackmail in the Congo, because they had maintained that the $11 billion debt that Congo had to them would not be forgiven if they entered into this deal with China. In addition to that, Congo was in line to receive some $600 million in loans or grants from the IMF. So it turned out to be a battle, not so much between Congo and the West, but between China and the West. And ultimately, Congo had to concede and renegotiate the deal with China, and to where it was reduced from $10 billion to $6 billion. Congo was able to get the operating funds that it needed, the $600 million. But we see that in China being engaged in the Congo, and the way it has been, runs interference with the West, at least on one level, particularly as it relates to the multilateral institutions. However, as it relates to the corporate interests, it's not so much of a confrontational relationship, in the sense that the structure in which the Congo is, or how it was established and how it was formed, much like the rest of the African continent, it was formed as an outpost for the extraction of natural resources. And that structure, that capitalist structure, remains in place to this very day. And we don't see China challenging that. What we do see China doing is maybe offering some better terms around the edges in terms of loans, maybe bringing more development for Congo's minerals. They're doing roads and hospitals and all, but they're not looking to set up Congo so that Congo can process the cobalt that it's producing. China processes 64% of the world's cobalt. Meanwhile, Congo has 60 to 70% of the world's reserves of cobalt and produces the largest percentage of cobalt in the world, but it doesn't process anything. So that neo-colonial model that Nkrumah talks about, where the resources are extracted out and returned to Africa as finished goods, is still very much in place and intact. In fact, one of the largest mines in the Congo, called the Tenke Fungurume mine, was owned by the Americans, by a company called Freeport-McMoRan out of Arizona. And that company sold the mine and it sold it to the Chinese. So we see the Chinese being fully engaged with American corporate power. And China is one of the main sources for the import of cobalt to the United States, according to the United States Geological Survey. So if the state of China is that engaged with the Congo and that aligned with US corporate interests in the Congo, in spite of the roles that take place diplomatically between diplomats, recently the Chinese ambassador and special envoy to Africa from the United States were going back and forth with each other about the Congolese government's aim to renegotiate the Chinese mining deals. So the point is that is the structure that's in place. China is not challenging that capitalist structure. It's not challenging the extractive process. It's not challenging the lack of vertically integrated economies in the Congo or on the African continent. And that makes one, the logical extension of that is, if it's not as a state, and the state interests certainly prioritize the global cooperative interest on the BRICS, if it's the state is not showing any, not demonstrating any intention to change the system, to restructure the system, then how is it that that BRICS is going to do it if China doesn't do it as a state itself? Just quickly on South Africa. South Africa is engaged in the Congo in so many ways. And whether we're talking about militarily through the UN and Rapid Deployment Brigade that was sent there in 2012, 2013 to confront militia groups in the Congo, whether you're talking about energy deals, Congo provides a substantial part of electricity to Eskom from the Inga Dam that's transmitted through to South Africa. However, I'd like to look at one particular case in terms of, or sector area in terms of South Africa's corporate interests in the Congo. They've long had corporate interests in the Congo, whether we're talking about Anglo Gold Ashanti, who has mining concessions, gold mining concession in the Congo worth billions of dollars, or even if we look at the current president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was a board member of a company called Xstrata. And Xstrata was in partnership with Glencore. And many of you are familiar with Glencore as a major, one of the largest, if not the largest mining company in the world, headed up by, formerly headed up by South African Ivan Glassenberg. So here we see Glencore, who is involved in the Congo in a very exploitative way on several levels, whether it was through corrupt deals with Israeli billionaire Dan Gertler, who's been sanctioned by the US Treasury Department, or polluting waterways in the Congo, you name it. But with Ramaphosa, it's no longer on the board. He had to resign the board of Extrata, of course, but remained a major shareholder of the company that was engaged in the Congo in extracting minerals, exploiting local labor, child labor, for the benefit of corporate interests. And we see that as a model in terms of South African corporate engagement in the Congo, where the corporations benefit from the relationship, and the Congolese elite, some in the state or in the government, but the people suffer tremendously and do not benefit at all from any of the deals or the minerals that are right under their feet that they sometimes dig up with their bare hands. So the central thrust of critique or presentation is that one, if you look at the individuals, nations, I just took two as an example, and their engagement with Congo as a representative of the continent as a whole, and a lot that happens in the Congo is emblematic of what unfolds on the African continent as a whole, then I don't see the usefulness of BRICS in bringing about any kind of fundamental or sustainable change that would benefit either Congo or Africa as a whole. In fact, in looking at probably a more useful instrument is to look at continue to look at those individual members of BRICS, particularly Russia, China, and India. And if you've looked over the last decade or so, or 5 to 10 years, what you see the more powerful instrument of analysis is to look at the so-called African conferences, whether we're talking about the Russia-Africa summit that took place in Sochi a couple of years ago, the India-Africa summit that took place last, I believe in 2019, 2020 was canceled. Look at FOCAC, that we're on the verge of the next FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Those are more useful instruments for looking at regional integration on the African continent and the relationship between Africa and these individual states. And one thing that looms large, in spite of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that's been initiated, is that Africa needs to get its house in order in terms of being coordinated, functioning as a unit, as Nkrumah and Touré and others had envisioned, because you have a situation where African nations are going to these summits as individual nations, not as Africa, not as a continent as a whole. And there's just no comparison when you have, Gabon or Rwanda going and engaging China, like on what level? So the big challenge is the integration of the continent as a whole. And when you talk about the integration of the continent as a whole, Congo looms large, front and center. And we haven't seen the engagement from Congo that one would expect, considering Congo's size. It's the second largest country on the African continent, fourth in population. Considering Congo's wealth, arguably not only the richest country on the continent, but in the planet, if we believe the Business Insider's economists who say that there's an estimated $24 trillion worth of natural wealth in the Congo. So we don't see the type of engagement from the Congo as a regional power, a continental power. It's a country that, unlike any other country on the African continent, has 9 African countries bordering it. So you know what happens in the Congo immediately affects those 9 neighbors. But again, we just don't see the initiative coming out of the leadership of the Congo that would put it squarely in the Pan-African tradition that we saw from Kwame Nkrumah and Modibo Keita and Touré, where they in the initial phases of the United States of Africa in developing the idea and the principles, and as Nkrumah laid out in his book, and The Challenge of the Congo, they saw Congo would serve as the capital of the United States of Africa in driving the Pan-African vision that Nkrumah had laid out. So just to wrap up, in this brief presentation, one, the notion of BRICS being something that an entity that offers any kind of hope or aspiration or tangible possibilities for Africa is highly dubious. In fact, a more concrete, genuine model would be to look at what Hugo Chavez did in USARAL in establishing throughout Latin America, where he was able to extricate individual countries from the clutches of the IMF and World Bank, as he did with Argentina in providing loans that retired Argentina's debt to multilateral institutions. The loans that he provided to countries like Jamaica and Haiti, low interest loans that would enable them to get access to cheap for energy for pennies on the dollar. So if we saw models like that coming out of BRICS, like what Chavez initiated throughout Latin America, then I would say we could have a genuine discussion about BRICS and its relationship to Africa and regional integration. But I'm not optimistic that that's what's going to happen. And as I shared with my presentation, you just look at the individual countries and their engagement with Africa. I chose Congo as an example. Then you'd have very, very little hope for anything viable coming from BRICS and as it relates to African regional integration. So I'll leave it there. I'll go to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Maurice Carney and Adryan. Thank you so much, friends.